Hey everybody, we are Francis, Martin, and Robert, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free.
Welcome back to Snakes and Otters. This is episode 79.
I am Martin.
And I am Robert.
And I'm Francis. 79, the same number as there were Star Trek episodes. You just kind of had to lay that out there. Robert mentioned it in the show prep. I said, I ain't letting that one pass. So
that's right. So we get our Star Trek reference out of the way.
Out of the way. Because we're talking movies this time. This is a pop culture episode, and we were so successful last year. We did our first version of movies we always have to watch. We said, we got to do this again, boys, because there's just too many good ones out there. So we kind of make it an annual thing. So we're back to do that again. Each one of us will pick two of our favorite movies, and we'll each talk about them. The intention is these are all of our favorite movies, but it's kind of like, and I forget which one of us came up with this whole premise, is when these movies come on television, you stop and you watch them. You know, the channel surfing ends when we run into this. And we're also willing to endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that our families might give to us and exert ourselves as masters of our own homes, even though in most
as long as the wife is not in the room.
That's exactly right. You got it. We're king of our castles when she's not around.
Retreat to the man caves and put them on that way.
That's exactly right. Find a way. That's right. These movies are heart and soul. And we stumbled into this one being a 70s celebration. We just kind of started thinking about it, and we ended up saying, well, these are all in the 70s. Well, this is great stuff, because as you all know, or maybe you don't, some of the greatest movies ever made were in the 70s. Of course, a lot of crap, too, just like any other decade. But
every decade has some really, really great stuff. I mean, you can find that really anywhere.
That's right. And it's just, these are
have their own character.
Well, that's right. That's right.
But it was a particularly fertile time because that, we've talked about this before, kind of that young generation of filmmakers is coming out. This is the Lucas Spielberg era.
Yep.
Right.
When they're getting started, Coppola. So this is a very fertile time with that second generation, that sort of post DeMille, Wyler, Billy Wilder kind of thing, where you start to see the emergence of Scorsese and people like that.
Yeah.
They're a pretty important cinematic decade.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, several of those names you mentioned is who we're going to be talking about. We've got Spielberg's first movie is what we're going to talk about. We've got two Mel Brooks movies that we're going to talk about. We've got Francis Ford Coppola. Depends on, we're not going to tell you which one it is because it could be several. But Martin's got that one kind of slipped up his sleeve. We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm going to start us off with one that's none of those. And it sort of kind of isn't really 70s. It's actually 1980 when it premiered in December. So I'm kind of dancing on the edge of the 70s, but it's close enough. It was made in the 70s, certainly. And it's a movie that, to me, was it's amazing. It's the first movie that I ever got when I first got my VCR. This is the first movie I rented. And we watched it in my dorm room. I don't know how long. And I would rent it regularly. We would watch it together. It was fantastic. The movie was 1980, John Boorman's Excalibur.
Here's the VHS.
That's right.
VHS, yes.
On VHS, that's right. Yeah, of course, I've since bought the Blu-ray. And I've actually listened to the director's commentary, by the way, by John Boorman. It's worth a listen, folks, if you love the movie, as we do. And Boorman himself, he kind of makes no apologies in the fact that this is a fantasy. It's not meant to be historically accurate. It's his own.
It sure isn't.
Well, absolutely, it's not. It steals a lot from Sir Thomas Malory, but it's a fantastical version, and the soundtrack alone is enough to just give you chills. It's got Wagner all through it. It's got O Fortuna in there.
One of the greatest pieces of music ever to appear in a movie.
Absolutely.
It really is.
So it's got so many wonderful performances in it. most of whom we don't know today, unfortunately, but that's why it's worth, if you haven't seen this movie, you definitely need to watch it. The late Nicole Williamson plays Merlin in a way that is totally different than any other Merlin before or since.
He was phenomenal. I loved his performance in that movie.
Absolutely.
He's got a great voice, too.
Oh, yeah, and he plays him as an eccentric, but they deliberately went with a almost hairless version. You know, Merlin is usually shown this shaggy, hairy guy, and Boorman talks about, he says he didn't want to show that. He wanted to subvert that trope. That's why they created, but Nicole Williamson didn't want to go around bald. So they came up with this cool little metal skull cap he wears, which has become synonymous with his character. That was just kind of Boorman talks about how it was just kind of a way to keep him happy, because Nicole Williamson, if you read anything about him, he was a nut. He was a fantastic actor, but he was definitely hard to get along with. So much so that Helen Mirren, who plays Morgana, absolutely despised him.
And Boorman knew it.
Yeah, because they had played together in Macbeth years before. And
it's interesting you mentioned that about Helen Mirren, and not to derail things, but this is one of the things I find fascinating about we start talking about movies and people who are in them. So you talk about how almost nobody in the movie would recognize today just because they're from a different time. I mean, the movie was made 40 years ago.
Right.
But Helen Mirren is probably the most recognizable person in that movie now.
Absolutely, yes.
Not entirely.
Sir Patrick, but his part is so small.
It's a bit part in many respects.
Yeah, it's a bit part.
And this is before
you almost don't realize who it is at first,
Sure, absolutely. Well, you can't mistake his voice. Right. In fact, and Robert, you probably remember this, when Star Trek The Next Generation was announced in like 86 that it was coming, and they listed the actors that had been cast, and Patrick Stewart's name was listed as the captain. They gave his CV of films, and of course they listed Excalibur. Well, the first thing I did was go to the VHS and say, okay, who is this guy? And I'm thinking, all right, is he the guy that played Percival or who, whatever? And then you have to go, because I didn't know him, I'd never seen him before. I had to go to the credits first and figure out. And I go, he's Leon deGrasse?
Yep.
I was totally floored. And of course, he is a giant since then.
Yes. But of the major actors, the major players in the movie, Helen Mirren is the one who's
absolutely
most recognizable.
Very much so. And in fact, Boorman, I don't know if he had a thing for her or not, but he talks about the magnificence of her breasts.
Who didn't?
That's true. And
Mark still has a thing for, even at this age. Marcus is our great friend Marcus Aurelius still has a thing for her.
Really? Well, I mean, she is beautiful, and yes, her breasts are legendary in the Hollywood world. Even now, as she's aged, they are still, believe it or not, she wears this metal breastplate that was form-fitted for her. Boorman says he still has it, and he's willing it to her when he dies. Yeah, he also has the original Excalibur and the Holy Grail and all sorts of stuff like this. Most of this was filmed in Ireland. The metal was for the armor was amazing. It's real. Everything in this movie is done in the traditional way with cameras and miniatures and on-site. There's no such thing as CGI. This was way before that. So you've got traditional movie making that puts forth this fantastic otherly realm with some really great actors in that. Nigel Terry plays Arthur from the age of 16 until 60 or so.
He did a phenomenal job, too.
He did a phenomenal job. It was really his first role. And Sherry Lungi, God, she was beautiful, but she still is. Actually, she's in her 60s now. As Guinevere, they just and the late Nicholas Clay, who played Lancelot, they all did fantastic jobs. In many respects, in a very odd movie. It's not like it certainly had nothing to do with Camelot, which was kind of the preeminent Arthurian movie 20 years earlier to that. It was rated R, for goodness sakes. I mean, it has a rape scene, for God's sakes. Probably about 15 minutes into it, ironically, it was John Boorman's daughter who played Igraine that got raped on screen while her father was filming. He says in the commentary, well, she was okay with it and I was okay with it, so we just did it. The hard part was the fire that was playing behind them, it got hot. Okay. But he was.
It was a very unique film. I mean, Boorman went out on a limb with this production. I mean,
he did. He had a hard time getting financing for it.
Anachronistic, at the time of the supposedly Arthur lived, there were no full suits of armor and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
So he chose a visual look that didn't work with the time period and glued it all together, and great dialogue all throughout. So he really took a risk with that movie, and he lucked out too that within a year or two of its release, cable TV movie channels start to take off.
Yes,
that's correct.
So it's a nice 3-hour. Yeah, so it's a nice 3-hour block filler on Showtime back in the day.
Yeah.
So it was on all the time.
Well, you talk about how he took a chance on this, and that's he did, but the deck was stacked in his favor, I think, as far as it being a good movie, because you've got the fantasy elements, which you're coming out of the 70s, and the last few years of the 70s, you see a resurgence of that sort of thing.
Oh yeah.
And because we had 8 or 10 years, the very end of the 60s up into the very end of the 70s, the last couple of years, where it's all reality, gritty kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I think people were hungry for this. That's why Star Wars and the Star Trek movie and all of the stuff that followed after that did so well in the science fiction realm. But you've got this fantasy, and visually it's appealing. But you know what? This is not a fantasy story so much as it is about the characters.
Yes.
Francis, you were talking about how it's not about Camelot. It's not about the Rex Harrison themes. It's about the relationship between Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot, and the ramifications of all the different things that are going on with those characters and Morgan Le Fay, and it really is a great story about the people. Mm-hmm. And yet that's not, you're kind of sucked into it thinking it's going to be a great fantasy film, and it is, but it's also a great movie about people and their relationships.
Well, it's very dark, too. It's very dark, but it's hopeful at the same time. But it steals very much the tone from the Arthurian legends themselves, that, Camelot still is the light in this very dark age. In fact, that's the first words that appear on the screen at the beginning of the movie is the Dark Ages, which I know, Robert, you don't like that term, but this, when they're shown here, it's exactly the way it's supposed to be.
To the entire 1,000 years between the fall of Rome and
I had to throw that out there. I know we've talked about that several times. It's just fantastic the way they do it. The ending of it. I mean, Trevor Jones does an amazing score that's tied in with all the rest of the Wagner and the other pieces to create a mood that was actually a little ahead of its time, because you have to understand Sword and Sorcery and Conan the Barbarian was 2 years away.
Yeah.
Both of those movies together were kind of a 1-2 punch to Hollywood saying, wow, this stuff will make money. And you have a slew of cheaply made and not so cheaply made, sword and sorcery movies made throughout the 80s.
Yeah, and it's not just, like a Conan. You've got everything from Legend to Willow.
Absolutely. And those were the bigger budget ones. Then you got Beastmaster and things like that.
Labyrinth.
Yeah, I mean, even Labyrinth. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of that stuff in there. Martin, you had something you were trying to, I think, get in there.
I was going to ask Francis, because I know he'll remember, what is the much, much later Arthurian movie with, like, Ian Gruffudd and...
that's a historical one. That's King Arthur. 2005 with Ewan Gruffudd and Clive Owen.
Yes, Clive Owen, yeah.
Antoine Fuqua, I believe I'm pronouncing it correct. He was the director of that. It was an amazingly good movie, but it's kind of meant the end of Rome in England. Yes. It's very historical. It bears very little resemblance to the Arthurian legends. It's more the historical Arthur, and it's great in its own right. But nobody's ever
it's not as much fun as Excalibur. Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
It's good. Again, a lot of good people in it. Is it Mads Mikkelsen is in it, right?
No, but it's the very first time on screen for Liam Neeson. Believe it or not.
Oh yes,
it's his first role. He plays Gawain. He's only in the middle of the movie.
No,
I forgot about that. You're right. So yeah, that's another big name. See, it's so small. I forgot about it.
Yeah, he's in there.
Yeah.
There's you might remember Syrian Hines, who played Julius Caesar in Rome. He plays Arthur's brother Kay in here.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
his first role too. These are all Irish actors. It's also Gabriel Byrne's first role as Uther. This was a big deal for a lot. Yeah. This was, in fact, that Boorman talks about in the commentary, the fact that Gabriel Byrne has a terrible Belfast accent, and it's hard for them to. They had to redub some of his stuff because it was his first freaking role. I mean, this guy's a giant now, but at the time, it was he's too Irish in many ways. But the role he plays it well.
So, not to steal your captaincy here, but we're spending an awful lot of time on your movie.
It's time to move. I know.
Yeah.
I love this movie. I'm sorry. We all love this movie.
I mean, we spent an entire episode on King Arthur movies. There's a lot of them. Yeah.
That's right. Well, let's move on. Skip a bit, brother. Which one of you wants to go next?
So, Martin, you go ahead and go next. I'll go on last.
Yeah, this one will change direction. Pretty good. Yep. So my movie, again, it's not that it's just awesome. It's if it's on, okay, stop. I'm sitting down on the couch. Don't talk to me. The Outlaw Josie Wales.
Oh God, I love that movie.
I've talked about this film before.
Might be the greatest Western ever made.
It is. It's one of the very best. It's probably Clint Eastwood's best effort.
He considers it his best. It was he directed it too, which is one of the reasons he loves it so much.
Yeah,
I got the DVD that has a special introduction with him at the beginning from just a few years ago, and he says that. He says, "Yeah, this one is probably the masterpiece, the best one."
Yeah, and it's and listeners, if you're not familiar with the story, which I would find hard to believe, but Clint Eastwood plays Josie Wales, a Missouri farmer, homesteader, break out of the Civil War, the Kansas militia, Kansas guerrillas, kill his family, burn his house down. He then joins Missouri guerrillas under the command of Bloody Bill Anderson, and they fight throughout the war, and the Kansas militia, Kansas guerrillas eventually become basically absorbed into the Union Army. So it's kind of is, and usually I react badly to these Civil War revisionist movies, where the Union's always portrayed as horrible and the poor Southerners are, they were just homesteaders, and guys, we're not into that deal. I mean, they're
right. This was the first one to do that. Before that, it was all the Union's perfect, and the Confederates are always the bad guys. And this is a deliberate subversion of that, showing, it's not quite as cut and dry.
Yeah, it mummies it up, but it leaves a lot of that behind very quickly.
Oh, yeah, it's not about that at all.
So it becomes more a film about how do you stitch these things back together? How does this Missouri guerrilla learn to live with Kansas homesteaders who are moving to Texas? And how does the country recognize the Native American population, and what do you do from there? And it becomes a real story about living together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Reconciliation after a terrible tragedy.
And of course, the great scene that I always love. I always say that I'm from the Josie Wales 10 Bear School of Diplomacy.
Oh.
The great scene where the Comanche are going to come and kill the family, and it's the family because the character, the grandma, who was this Kansas settler who hated everybody, who then learns to accept that she's got Indians in tow with her and this Missouri guerrilla in tow with her and all this stuff. They settled in Texas, and the Comanches don't want them there. They're going to burn them out. They're going to shoot them all. And Josie goes up in the hills to meet with them and negotiate and say, look, we can live or we can die. I'm not promising anything extra. How about we just try to live together? And it's a great scene. I think it's Will Sampson who plays Ten Bears.
Yeah.
And I love that movie. It's so great. And all these great characters are in it, and lots of great lines in it, of course, all very quotable and very repeatable. And the weird thing about it, though, no one knew this, I think, at the time, but when Eastwood bought the rights to the book, the book's author, nobody knew, is a pen name for a guy that had actually been in the Klan.
Really?
I didn't know that. No.
So this
Dawn of
doesn't
Texas
come to
was the name of the book. I didn't know that.
So this doesn't come to light until like the 90s. But of all the weird things for somebody from the Klan to write this book that ends up being this film about, hey, how about if we just live together for a change?
Yeah.
How about if we just get along?
Yeah, and the war is over. I mean, that's kind of the way the movie ends. Is Josie? He's wounded. He rides off to an uncertain fate. But the guy who's been chasing him, his old friend who turned against him, says, why don't you tell Mr. Wales that the war is over? And that's kind of what the whole point is about: is trying to find a way to live with something when changes come along and it's left you behind. You can either learn to adapt, live together, or die together.
Yeah. And another film with great performances, that's John Vernon from Animal House, plays Fletcher.
Yes, a fantastic actor. He didn't do near as much as I wished he had. He's got a great voice.
Oh, the voice is amazing, yeah. But he was the mayor in Dirty Harry, the first Dirty Harry film.
Oh, that's right.
So Clint Eastwood loved using him.
A lot of Eastwood actors.
Yeah, Clint tends to use the same folks over and over again. Sam Bottoms, that would go on to be in Apocalypse Now, as Lance. Chief Dan George plays Lone Waddy. The Cherokee that goes with him as they head to Mexico. So that's pretty much my number one always stop and watch is Josie Wales.
It is a great film. It's one of the things I think is great about all the movies we choose is that it seems like we do a really good job of not just picking ones that are, either titillating or mindless escapism, but they're well made, as well as having something to say. Not always. When we did last time, we did several Cary Grant films. The comedies he did didn't necessarily have anything to say, but they're just so well crafted. And we talk about this all the time about how the craft is so important in pop culture and just about anything. Mm-hmm. And especially Clint and his movies, the movies like Outlaw Josie Wales and so much of the stuff he does, it's just well crafted. And Excalibur was the same way. It was well crafted and a great story.
That great story piece, that's kind of where we tend to work with that, because if you tell a story and tell it well, it gets people's attention. It doesn't have to be deep. It's usually better if it is, and both of these definitely had some meta things in them that were pretty important. But hey, they don't have to be. I mean, Robert's got some comedies coming up. They're not exceptionally deep, although they are pretty profound at times.
Well, and in context of today's world, the depth and profundity of them are interesting points that we could certainly argue.
I guarantee it.
So, before I get on to mine, unless, Martin, you have anything else? It sounded like you were kind of done with your Josie Wales. It's hard to spend as much time on our movies as Francis has spent on Excalibur. We'd make a 3-hour episode.
Ha, 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 ha.
Ha, 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 ha. Anyway.
You guys can interrupt me at any time.
We try.
You do. That's correct.
So, gentlemen, before we get to my movie, I am drinking the Woodford Double Oaked tonight. I thought I'd go back to my all-time standby favorite there. And it's my go-to bourbon when I want something good and smooth. Is quality bourbon.
You're just a show-off, because I've got a non-double oaked Woodford.
But you know what? That's still a great bourbon.
Well, absolutely, it is. It's well worth. It's smooth. It's just not as robust, I suppose.
Yeah.
I've got that one in my sights to get some more of that.
I'm on a budget tonight. I'm doing Old Tub on the budget. This is really, really nice stuff for $22 a bottle. So I popped me a couple of flamingo-shaped ice cubes in the bottom here, and having some Old Tub. So, yeah, I think we'll draw close on Josie Wales, because I'm like Francis. I could go on forever if I get started talking about the scenes and the lines and the Don ain't much of a living boy and stuff like that.
Hell's coming to breakfast. I mean, we can keep going. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So go for it, Robert.
So my two movies are made by the same guy, Mel Brooks. Chose a couple of Mel Brooks movies, and the first one I want to talk about, and we may, as long as we're going, we may only do one movie apiece tonight. But I want to talk about Blazing Saddles. Primarily because this was just on television, one of the cable channels recently. I forget which one, but it was still edited all to hell. Because when you think about the language in that movie, you can't say that. It's just not going to happen. And, a lot of the humor, by today's standards, you look at it, it's very childish and sophomoric. It's, there's fart jokes and all kinds of stuff that is not sophisticated. It's almost slapstick in a way.
Yeah.
But it's, to me, Mel Brooks with his comedies, and this is probably the most slapstick of all of them. He does such a good job, though, still with the characters. They're all memorable. It's not just about the characters. But, I mean, you've got Madeline Kahn, who is in almost every one of his movies, and she's playing that knockoff Marlene Dietrich character.
Lily von Stoopt.
Yes, Lily von Stoopt.
Tuale Titweiler, I believe she is called.
And she does a great Marlene Dietrich, and she gets the accent down just right, and she's memorable not just because of the goofy jokes. And Harvey Korman is in this. And he does a great villain, which is just phenomenal. And he and Mel Brooks, Mel Brooks plays the idiot governor, and he basically doesn't know what he's doing, and he's basically his only goal is to chase tail, basically.
Behind the curtains with his secretary, yes.
Yes.
I didn't get a harump out of either one of you guys.
Harump. Yes.
And the scenes with the two of those guys together are just fantastic. And the comedic skill of all these different actors is phenomenal. And Cleavon Little is the sheriff, is just he's
awesome.
Great.
He's fantastic. He pulls it off. The reason that movie is not offensive, like it could be offensive, is because he's the only guy, with the exception of Gene Wilder's character, that is kind of in on the joke. He's saying, I'm kind of making this up, gentlemen. I'm just showing you how evil racism really is and how stupid it is. And that's one of the reasons this movie is so great, because that's the whole meta narrative, is saying, if you're a racist, you're the stupid one. The joke's on you.
Exactly.
And that's why this movie, I love watching it so much, even though, it drops the N-word a million times.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
Why but, again, when the hero is a black man, it kind of it's funny when Gene Wilder wakes up in the jail and he looks upwards because he's hanging upside down and sees Cleavon Little. He goes, and Cleavon says, "Are you awake?" He goes, "Yes." "Are we black?" He goes, "Yes, we are." "Then we're awake."
I'm awake, but very confused.
That's right. But you see that racial harmony, because those two are the best of friends. They become the best of friends here, and those are the only ones that get it. And, of course, they're the ones who succeed in the end.
Yeah, it's got its message, but, unless when you don't get the message until, you're into it more, you're drawn in by the comedy and what have you. And
You've got to stay, if you're easily offended, you'll never make it through.
That's true. Snowflakes today could never watch this movie.
Knee-jerk reactions
they need to
do not
stop
apply.
watching 5 minutes into it and go to their safe space. But that's
Travis
kind of the
Lanky.
point,
Yeah.
like you said, to show how stupid it is.
Yeah, because it's the same way of telling the same point as Josie Wales, or different way of telling the same point as Josie Wales.
Yeah.
Hey, guess what? Let's live together.
Yep.
And stop being dumbasses. And but it's done in such a hysterical way. And was it Richard Pryor originally going to play?
He was. It was talked
Sheriff?
about, and they ended up, and I don't remember what the reason was that he didn't make that.
Wanted too much money, or no, the producers were afraid because he was always whacked out on coke or
That's
something.
exactly it. That's
So
right.
I think the producers didn't want him.
That's
but
why they brought in
I
Cleavon
think
Little.
Cleavon Little did it better anyway. Than
I do too.
Pryor could have.
And
Richard Pryor can be great, but
Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder did several movies together, actually. Silver Streak and Inner Evil. And they did fine. They actually had some good chemistry. But you can't beat Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder. They just amazing.
They were phenomenal together.
Yeah, Cleavon Little's style was perfect.
That's right. May they both rest in peace, by the way, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yes.
They both passed away.
Yes.
Mel
So,
Brooks
yeah,
is still around, though.
Mel Brooks, the man really is a genius.
Oh,
yeah. He was able to push the boundaries, because really, even when that movie came out, as much as the N-word is used, that I'm sure that gave some of the studio execs the heebie-jeebies. Because you're talking the early 70s. There had been race riots in several cities.
Oh, yeah.
This was not a something that you could just say whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
So doing it probably was the right move at the right time in many ways. And kind of like I said, it kind of suckered you in, and by the time you're enjoying all the comedy, you realize, man, maybe that is kind of stupid.
Yeah, they didn't know what they had on their hands, and it was like, well, it's kind of cheap. We're not out a whole lot. Yeah, let Brooks make whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he had a history at this point of making some good movies, so he was kind of like, because his name, it is Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles at this point.
Yeah.
So he was able to command enough of a presence in Hollywood that they'll say, because you're right, it didn't cost much. I mean, there's westerns everywhere at this point, and it's all done on the set, and they even incorporate some modern sets into it as the movie moves on. And you have to suspend disbelief when they break through the wall into Dom DeLuise in there with his champagne floats and gentlemen running around in there.
Yeah, when there's a big fight scene and it breaks out into all the other movies being made.
That's right. Oh, yeah, I work for Mel Brooks. Boom, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm working for Mel Brooks.
So, yeah, I mean, and just the number of famous people, famous actors that were in that, and they were famous for the time, too.
Yeah.
Not just famous later. It's an all-star cast, and just about everybody does a phenomenal job in that. But that's true of Mel Brooks. Again, he's a great craftsman. He really is. I mean, I go on and on about that and Mel Brooks. What's our time, gentlemen?
Just go ahead, Francis. Go on to your next one.
Yeah, we can make this roll. We can make this roll here. Robert, do you want to slide into your next one? Because we're already...
Well, I was going to say, that might be a good thing to do while we're on Mel Brooks.
Because you're going to do another Mel Brooks.
Yeah. So the other Mel Brooks is probably one he's almost as well known for from the 70s, and that's Young Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
Yes, but in the end, it's Frankenstein.
That's right. The name is Frankenstein.
Yeah, Gene Wilder is in it. Madeline Kahn is in it. Marty Feldman does a great job as Igor. That guy was born to play that part.
That's Igor.
Yes, Igor. Yes,
just remember,
Igor.
that's right. Terry Garr. Let's not forget Terry Garr.
Oh yes, the wonderful Terry Garr.
Rolling in the hay. Oh yes.
Peter Boyle.
She says even today she still gets asked when she's seen if they want to roll in the hay with her.
I believe it.
I can believe it too. Yes.
Yes. What knockers? Oh,
thank you, Doctor. Oh.
Yeah.
And let's not forget Frau Blucher. Gloria Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, have to have the horse.
all the sight gags and the double entendres. This is probably the greatest movie for double entendres that I have ever seen. But it's shot in black and white because it's meant to be a throwback to the horror films, of course.
Yeah.
Doing a send-up of those. And it's just, to me, it's just one of those things that is so enjoyable for not just the comedy, but it's just, I don't know, to me, there's just something about black and white films to begin with that I just absolutely love.
Yeah.
And, you throw some of my favorite comedic actors in this, and it's just, to me, it's just one of those things. It's a great hour and a half to spend whiling away your time, just relaxing, because, there's not necessarily any, deep message to this one. It's just plain fun entertainment. And it's great when you can pick up on all the little send-ups, if you're well-read enough to catch up on catch all those, in addition to, all the double entendres. But, because again, Mel Brooks is such a great master at saying two things at once.
That's very well put, sir.
Yeah.
That's very good. It helps if you've seen the original James Whale movies that these are based off of, because you pick up a lot of the little sight wink wink shake shakes that Brooks puts in here, because as a cinematographer, it's going to be playing off those images that are very much part of our understanding.
Oh, and what's the guy who played the monster in this?
Peter Boyle.
Peter Boyle, yes. I could not think of his name. He's great. Yeah, great character actor to begin with.
For children of the 90s, Ray Romano's dad.
Yes,
that's right.
Ray Romano's dad.
That's right, yeah. And he doesn't have that many lines.
No.
Most of it, he says very little until the very end, and even that's not not that very much. It's just it's fun. My God, it's just fun. And he ends it up, and just Marty Feldman alone, in many respects, makes that movie. They're digging the grave at one point, and he says, and they come out, and he's saying, "God," he says, "That could be worse. Could be raining," and of course, the lightning strikes and starts raining, and then he looks over at him and talks about wanting to give him they're doing charades about giving him a sedative stuff. I mean, we could go on and on.
Yeah.
God, it's so good.
Yeah, but I think those are two masterpieces. Not necessarily the highlight of his career, but man, they are at the top.
Again, we always watch them every single time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they don't get around that often anymore. That's why I was so surprised to see Blazing Saddles the other day.
Well, yeah, I mean, around October, whenever the monster movies get shown, Young Frankenstein kind of makes its way out sometimes, along with those other horror movies and stuff like that. It's just kind of 'tis the season.
Yeah. So going in reverse order, Martin, what was your second movie?
Yes. So my second one, again, is one of those landmark films, Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather.
Oh, yes, love it.
I'm a little bit of a kind of a mob book guy anyway. Read the mob books, do the mob movies. Goodfellas, Casino, those are a couple of my other favorites. But for some reason, even though The Godfather is kind of a more romanticized version of these tales, I do stop and watch.
Mm-hmm. You're talking specifically the first one.
Yes.
Not necessarily the trilogy. I mean, that's kind of wider than we're really wanting to go here.
The third one, I don't think I've ever watched the third one all the way through. I watched the second one, I believe. To me, it's a little plodding, a little slow.
A lot of people claim the second one is the better of all of them. I can't agree with that, only because I'm a Brando guy. I love Brando.
Yeah.
He walks so large through the first movie. Just those first 15 minutes where they're at his daughter's wedding, and just the opening scenes. I'm sorry, his presence, his absence would be felt without that. And that's one of the reasons the movie just tears at me every time, because he doesn't survive. I mean, that's kind of a story, of course. Yeah. I'm thinking, wow.
And that's kind of my thing with it too. Is it's kind of this push-pull with me for The Godfather, and that kind of this romanticized Don Corleone granting all these benefices to all these. I was like, no. In reality, most of these guys really were killers. Just
amoral. That's like Corleone ends up being.
Yeah. this kind of, I mean, most of these guys were these street-level Luca Brasi and would do anything for a buck, including strangle you. You know, Goodfellas is, you know, much closer to it. So, in The Godfather, the scene where Sonny goes out after Connie's husband,
right,
and beats him up in the street,
right,
wouldn't happen. They'd have just picked him up one night and you'd never seen him again.
Which,
right.
Of course, is essentially what happens at the end of the movie. Which kind of shows why Sonny was a bit of a putz, and Michael is the one who really is the power.
And that's the point of the film, too, is that transformation of Michael from the war hero to the Don.
The absolutely
ask me about my business, Kay.
That's right, and efficient too. He is brutally good at what he does. Which his father was good at what he did, but was less brutal. His brother Sonny was brutal, but not good at what he did. Michael is kind of the preeminence of all of it. He's the way it's, you know, that's why he succeeds. The movie, you know, it's not about Brando's Vito Corleone. It's about Michael.
It's about Michael, yeah. Michael is the godfather of the title.
Right.
But, yeah, for some reason it does. It always drags me in. Of course, you know, the great scene of...
even when you try and get out, it just drags you back in.
Yes.
You know, the great scene with the horse in the head in the bed and all that good stuff. And, you know, the Don always gets his way. And
we didn't even mention one of my favorite actors, Robert Duvall, who plays such a major role with Tom Hagen in this movie. He's kind of the outsider looking in. I was reading something about this movie lately. He's meant to be the surrogate for the audience that doesn't understand the Italian culture, and they have him to kind of show what those differences are. And he is so amazing. I mean, you think about it. He's one of the most sympathetic characters in there. He's adopted into this family, and he gives his all to it, and he's accepted completely. He's just like another son, which that's kind of a commentary on this is not just a group of thugs out there. There's a sophistication here that I don't want to necessarily say it's worthy of imitation, but it's certainly worthy of taking notice.
Yeah,
and that's Coppola. I mean, that's his delivery.
You know, and that's another thing that one of my problems with, again, being a little bit red on the real thing. Concierge isn't the Don's attorney. You know, the concierge is never going to be an Irish lawyer. In the real mob family, the concierge is the guy that's usually the go-between between the street crews and the boss.
Right.
Well,
that's supposed to know everything.
Movie, that gets explained more because Tom Hagen is really not the concierge. He's a temporary guy. Because the real one has died, and he fills the role because he's got the trust. But it's meant to only be for now. It's not really meant. But if you see the first movie by itself, you don't get that. You're right. And
one of the things that I have not nearly the experience with the Godfather movies to weigh in on this, but I do want to bring up one thing. So, do you guys remember Matthew Broderick movie from the 80s called The Freshman?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Loved Brando in that movie because he was playing Don Corleone in disguise, basically.
Yeah.
And it was just phenomenal because it was about, you know, Matthew Broderick getting pulled into what he thinks is the mob life accidentally. It's just a fantastic movie. It's a little bit of another one of those. It's a little bit of a send-up of the genre. But yeah, just Brando in that was just phenomenal. Every time I think of Godfather, I think of that movie next.
Yeah. Brando did some really great movies late in his career. He did that one and Don Juan DeMarco with Johnny Depp, believe it or not. And they're excellent. I mean, this isn't even the fat Brando by this point. Yeah. The man could still act. He was that great.
And don't forget, he's Superman's dad.
Oh, there you go. That's exactly right. And if you get a chance to see the Donner cut of Superman 2, he's in it because they filmed all that stuff. They just never released it until they rearranged things, and they kind of did away with the whole Superman 2 that was released, the Lester cut, and brought him all back. It was great to hear his voice. He's got one of those voices that's just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely phenomenal as Kurtz. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, exactly. Of course, that's the reason he was in Apocalypse Now, is because he'd done The Godfather before, and he knew Coppola, and Coppola was able to talk him into it because that, from what we read, that wasn't easy. Because he wanted to do it his way, he didn't really want to do it, and he only shows up for a little while, and he has to be photographed a certain way, blah, because he's Brando.
And he's one of those guys that studios didn't trust.
Yeah.
Didn't want him around.
Yeah, because he makes outrageous demands.
Yeah.
Well, he made, what was it, something like $10 million for 15 minutes in Superman 1?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember but it was a ludicrous amount for 15 minutes of screen time, and probably not even a full 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, but he got top billing too. I mean,
and he got top billing.
Christopher Reeve was a nobody.
Yeah,
at the time.
So Francis, we're back around.
Swing back around. I'm gonna leave us. I'm gonna end us with one of the greatest movies of all time. You all know this. Steven Spielberg's first real big movie. It's not his first, but it's the one that made him a household name, and it almost destroyed his career. To tell you this, that 1975 great movie, Jaws. The first one. The movie that made an entire nation afraid to go into the water that summer, and for the next 3 or 4 summers after that.
Yeah.
It has the story is well documented. The mechanical shark didn't work worth a damn that they had in here because there's no such thing as CGI in these days. So Spielberg takes a chance, and bearing in mind the studio is on his back, constantly. You're over budget, you're over time, what the hell are you doing here? This is for, in many respects, a junior filmmaker. So he films it from the shark's perspective in many places and scares the absolute dog crap out of the audience as a result from the way he does it. The shark itself is actually minimally in the movie, and that's what makes it so good. That and the three leads who are phenomenal in it. Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and my personal favorite, Robert Shaw.
The man, Robert Shaw.
Yeah.
Yeah. And filming on location, too. I mean,
absolutely. On the freaking water, which, the studio didn't want him to do that.
Super expensive.
Super expensive.
Yeah.
Subject to the weather.
It was a fantastic film. It really was.
Yeah. The first summer blockbuster that really started the idea, the notion of release your big movies in the summer and we'll have this great summer season. It's Jaws that starts that.
Yeah. And it spawned... the whole Jaws thing is fodder for one of the greatest meme that you'll ever see. Is I think we're going to need a bigger boat. You see that all over the place.
That's exactly
or variations
right.
on it.
So many famous lines in it and things like that. That's probably the most famous of it.
Yeah, but that opening scene though, where the shark gets the girl who's swimming, and you see the you don't see the shark. You just see what the shark does. Right. And you see the hit on her leg, she gets jumped, where she's basically jerked in the water and pulled down a little bit, and then finally, under and all that. That was phenomenal filmmaking.
Absolutely. Susan Backlini was the actress that did it, and she was. I mean, she'll talk about it now, because it's really kind of her only real role. And they did it. There she is out there, buck naked, and they film it out there for like days with these weird filters. I mean, it's filmed during the day, but you can't tell because of the way the filters they're using on that. And she sells it. Man, she sells it so well because you just see her head above the water most of the time.
Right.
And it scares the hell out of people because you know what's happening, but you really don't. And all of a sudden, you never lose the fear that you get when she's pulled under and doesn't come back, and you just hear the dinging of the buoy, and that's Talk about an opening scene that sets the tone for the whole movie. Now, Peter Benchley wrote that scene in the book because I read that book. I was 10 when the movie came out. I didn't see it till we were in college because it still scared the shit out of me. But I read the book. Talk about a glutton for punishment. I read the book because everybody was reading the book in those summers. Yeah. And that whole scene is pretty much filmed as Benchley wrote it. And I'll give him credit as an author, even though he's kind of repudiated the book because he kind of took on a life of its own. Sharks being killed even today in great big things.
Yeah.
He didn't like that, and rightfully so, because they are an endangered species. They're very necessary for the ecosystem. But
just think, without Jaws, we probably wouldn't have had 5 Sharknado movies.
That's true. Absolutely. No, we wouldn't have any shark movies. There wouldn't be such a thing as a shark movie.
Yeah, it wouldn't be Shark Week, you know.
Little Shark Week.
That's right, because it all kind of trying to recapture what that magic that Spielberg caught in the bottle that great summer of 1975. I mean, Jaws 2 was meh. It was not real. Roy Scheider was in it, and they gave him actually a little bit of dramatic work to do, and he was better. He was pretty good with that. But I'm sorry, Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw's absence, you just couldn't do it. They couldn't redo it again. I love Robert Shaw in that movie. Of course, I watched most of anything that he did. Of course, he was drunk a whole lot of the time, actually. And you guys know the famous scene which is the scariest moment in the whole movie is when they're on the boat talking, and he tells the story of the USS Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's written by our great hero, John Milius.
Yeah, which we talked about before with Milius. You know, it's interesting you brought up the novel because, Benchley's novel is awesome. It is very well done. It's much more layered and complex than the film. You can't obviously catch all of that. And Spielberg makes a deliberate decision to make the Hooper character much more noble and heroic and survive.
Oh, yeah.
Novel, he's a scumbag.
Yeah, well, and because in the novel, he's this beach bum that seduces Brody's wife. I mean, he's this great, big, tall, tan guy.
It's a class thing, too, because his older brother dated Brody's wife originally. In the novel, there's a whole lot of class division stuff in it.
Right.
Brody's wife, Ellen, is actually from money. Brody's a local.
Right.
And there's this whole thing of, Hooper's from her world. And Spielberg cut all of that out in the film. It's way too complex.
Yeah, there's no real room for that. Well, the ending itself is completely different. And people, you watch the movie at the end, of course, the shark has to bite it.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, pun very much intended.
Dramatically, too. In the novel,
it has to happen because the novel, basically, the shark comes up to Brody, stops swimming, and drowns, and goes to the bottom, and Brody watches it descend with Quint still attached to it because Quint isn't eaten. He gets caught. His leg gets caught in one of the ropes that are attached to the barrels that are in the shark, and he gets drowned that way. Well, I'm sorry, Quint gets a much better. Quint has to die the way he dies in the movie because it's set up brilliantly. He escaped the sharks once the sharks come back to extract its revenge. There's a tragedy around that. It's just you had to blow up the shark, even though there's no way that frickin' tank would have stayed in the damn shark's mouth.
But to me, the big interesting part and what made the film work, and Spielberg made these decisions, is cutting all of that stuff out and focusing it on the fear aspects, and that's what made it a great summer blockbuster. But the novel is great too, in a different way. Again,
because everybody read it. Once the movie came out, everybody wanted to read the book, and it's a long book. It's like 400 pages. It's very different.
Yeah, but it's very much a statement about class divisions and the nature of these little small tourist towns in New England and.
Yeah, and actually, if I remember correctly, it's Amityville. It's the same setting as the Amityville horror movies. Isn't the town Amityville or Amity?
The town is Amity Island.
Yeah.
It's got the same title in it. It's still kind of a play on words because it means friendship. They even say that in the movie, which is kind of the point because it ain't very friendly when there's a shark out there.
Yeah. No, it's meant to be Cape Cod. It's meant to be Martha's Vineyard, Kennedy's, all that business. Whereas like Amityville Horror is Long Island, New York-ish stuff.
Okay, never mind. Cut that from the tape.
But that's my other movie. I have to watch it every single time. We can all probably quote it if we thought very long and hard about it. But you're right. The number one quote that comes out is "You're going to need it for your boat," because this is the first time you ever see shark. Really, you see glimpses before, but you really see him there. And it's a fishing story. The last third of the movie, which is the best part of the movie, is just three guys in a boat versus the shark. And the shark almost wins 2/3.
Yeah.
Shark wins 2 out of 3 falls.
Yeah. Yeah.
The final fall is the most important one.
That's right, exactly. Smile, son of a bitch. Boom.
Yeah, it's definitely in that same New England literary tradition, straight from Melville to Ben
Yeah, you're right. There's a
draw
lot
straight
of
lines.
Melville's overtones in this. It's because Quint is still kind of an Ahab figure.
He is.
He's still going back after the one that got away, and of course it gets him in the end. But it works. It still works. Quint is, they call him a colorful character in the movie, and I'll give Robert Shaw credit because in the book he's not that interesting. He's kind of dour. But you bring Robert Shaw drunk as he was on that screen, and he sells it every single time.
Well, that's outstanding. Outstanding. So that's 6 70s films that listeners, I'm sure you know, but if you don't, if you happen to
check
be
them out.
A little, one of these kind of maybe a Gen Z or a millennial that hasn't happened to come across these yet, they are outstanding filmmaking. Don't be intimidated by Blazing Saddles. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. You don't have to grab your blankie and run to the corner. It's okay. Because the point is, all the people who are saying those words, they're the dumbasses.
That's right.
So it all comes out cool in the end. And it's all about learning how to live together. Francis, buddy, what are we doing next time?
We're going back to history next time. A little palate cleanse, we done a couple of, we did Civil War earlier this year, and we did Nietzsche last time. We're going to go back to American history. And Martin, you're the one that wanted to do this. We want to talk about the turn of the century, not the one that just most recently happened, but the one before that, the one that coined the term.
The one that people our age think of when you say turn of the century.
The one that coined the term turn of the century, meaning the new American century, 1899 to 1901. This is the time of William McKinley, the time of the Spanish-American War. This is just prior to Theodore Roosevelt's arrival on the world stage. And in many respects, it's America's ascendancy onto the world stage.
Yep.
World War I would not have been really possible or even considered the way it came out with the Americans if it weren't for what happens in this time. And Martin really, really, really is jonesing to talk about this. He's the most well-read on that era. So we're going to have a great time talking about it.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.